The Heritage Springer, a bike inspired by its 1948 ancestor, designed with the flavor of the past, but developed using some of the most advanced computer analysis available. The Heritage Springer front end may appear the same as the standard Springer, but the change to the 16-inch wheel required that many components had to be redesigned to accommodate the larger tire. In this program, we will look at the differences between the 16 and 21-inch Springer models. These include the steering geometry, new brake mounting, a new hydraulic shock absorber to accommodate the increased front-end mass and geometry, new procedures for head bearing adjustment, and some simpler procedures covering all Springer models, such as new rocker adjustment procedures and new service intervals. Let's begin with the new service intervals for the rockers and steering head bearings for all Springer models. The rocker bearings should be checked for tightness at 500 miles and then at every 10,000 mile increment. The spring fork can be disconnected from the rockers without removing the front end from the motorcycle. Cut the cable strap that attaches the fender lamp wire to the brake line. Next, remove the caliper upper mounting bolt along with the washer and lower mounting pin. Remove the brake caliper and support it in an area away from the front fender. Remove both hubcaps using the hubcap removal and installation tool, part number HD 41494. Next, remove the instrument console following the steps given in the latest service manual. Loosen the gas tank mounting screws and remove the tank enough to gain access to the wiring harness. Disconnect the fender lamp wire connector from the harness and carefully pull the wire free from the harness and tank area. Remove the special pin and axle castle nut. Place a shop towel under the wheel to catch parts that may fall from the hub. Slide the axle out with one hand while supporting the wheel with the other. Then remove the wheel assembly from the rockers. Tight clearances exist between the fender and front fork. Protect the fender by wrapping a shop towel around the studs on the right side of the fork. Reinsert the axle to support the fender assembly. Remove the spring pin, nut, and socket head screw. Support the fender while removing the axle. Carefully slide the fender down until the fender bracket is just below the fork leg. Rotate the fender so the fork leg is between the bracket and fender. Continually lowering the fender until it clears both fork legs and remove. This adjustment must be performed with the spring fork secured to the rigid fork using cable straps. Otherwise, personal injury could result from the sudden forward snap of the spring fork. First, loosen the bearing retainer jam nuts. Then, using a hex driver, loosen the bearing retainers. Next, loosen the fork pivot studs and remove the nut and washers. Do not remove the stud bolts from the rockers. Tighten the bearing retainers to between 25 and 35 inch-pounds torque. Next, hold the bearing retainer and tighten the jam nut to between 95 and 105 foot-pounds torque. Remove the pivot studs from the spring fork. Then, using a torque wrench, rotate the rocker through its travel arc. The torque reading should be between 25 and 35 inch-pounds. If you feel any grinding when moving the rockers, the spherical bearings must be replaced. If the torque reading does not meet the service requirements, the bearing retainer adjustment procedure must be repeated to obtain the correct torque reading. Attach the rocker to the spring fork with the pivot studs. Install the washers and tighten the hex nut to 45 to 50 pounds torque. Reinstall the front fender, taking precautions not to damage the fender. Raise the fender so that the axle can be inserted through the fork and fender holes to support the assembly. Install the Allen head screw, washer, and a new nut. Tighten to between 18 and 22 pounds torque. Next, install the spring clip and remove the front axle. Install the thin spacer on the axle. Lift the wheel and place it between the rockers. Then install the axle. Next, install the thick spacer, followed by the washer and castle nut. Tighten the castle nut to 60 pounds torque. Align the nut slot with the axle hole by tightening the nut if needed, and install the special pin. Install both hubcaps using the hubcap tool. Tighten each hubcap until they make contact with the rubber seal, then continue for 1/4 of a turn. In this next section, we will demonstrate the new procedures for head bearing adjustment on the Heritage Springer. But first, let's discuss some of the differences between the Heritage Springer and the Springer Softail. For starters, the Heritage Springer has less rake and longer trail compared to the Springer Softail. Also, the front shock absorber has different dampening rates due to the greater mass of the wheel and fender. Rebound dampening is almost doubled, but compression dampening is the same. The key identifier separating the Heritage shock from the Springer is no adhesive emblem and a nub at the top of the shock. The Heritage brake components are mounted on the opposite side of the forks. Because of increased brake loads from the larger tire, the brake reaction link is mounted to the rigid fork through a load distribution bracket and connects directly to the caliper bracket. In conjunction with the design and development of the Heritage Springer, a new lubricant was selected for the steering head bearings. This calcium mineral-based grease has special additives for superior protection against moisture, corrosion, and fretting. Because of the new grease for the steering head bearings, a new procedure had to be created for the steering head bearing adjustment. Both wheels of the motorcycle must be off the ground with the vehicle level in order to properly adjust the steering head bearings. Locate the grease nipple on the side of the steering neck and lubricate the head bearings prior to adjusting the fall-away. Remove the clutch and throttle cables. Next, remove the acorn nut and lock washer from the bearing retainer. Then loosen, but do not remove the pinch bolt on the upper triple clamp. Remove accessory weight that would influence the way the front end swings. This would include the windshield and windshield bag. Place some suitable marking material, such as masking tape, on the front fender. Center the front end so that it balances without falling to one side. Position a pointer on the floor so that the pointer is centered on the front of the fender. Lightly tap the fender to one side until it begins to move or fall away on its own. Mark this point on the fender. Repeat this process, tapping the fender in the opposite direction. The markings need not be in the center of the tape. Measure the distance between the marks. The steering head is properly adjusted if the marks are 1 to 2 inches apart. If the marks are less than 1 inch apart, the bearing adjuster nut is too loose. If the marks are more than 2 inches apart, the nut is too tight. Remember, a small turn of the nut will change the fall-away points quite a bit. After you have set the correct fall-away, tighten the triple clamp pinch bolt to between 25 and 30 foot-pounds torque. Next, install the rubber washer and acorn nut. Tighten the nut to between 30 and 35 inch-pounds torque. Repeat the procedure to make sure the adjustment has not changed. Reinstall the cables and accessories after rechecking the fall-away. Proper steering head adjustment will go a long way to help ensure proper responsiveness of the motorcycle. This adjustment should be checked at the 500-mile service and every 5,000 miles after that. The procedures covered in this program will help you understand the proper techniques for maintaining the new Heritage Springer Softail.